Hello again, eighth graders. I'm happy to report that this is going to be your fourth and final area of annotation focus for your dystopian novel. Again, Mrs. Fiorini and I were talking about how it's really about quality and not quantity. So instead of 5 categories, there will only be 4. So just as a reminder, before we get into today's lesson, whether you're using Post-its or writing directly in the text, or maybe a combination of two, just make sure you're labeling your notes with the focus. And again, there should be 4 areas total. They should be visible to you. Make sure you're highlighting the passages on the pages. And again, those passages are being used to make sense of the annotation focus. And don't forget to connect the dots. This is where you come full circle. You're clearly connecting the annotation focus at hand to the passage. And last but not least, our 10, 10, and 10 rule. Make sure your notes are very clear to you, make sense to you, not just in 10 minutes or 10 days, but yes, even 10 years. You want to make sure that you understand that this really is the biggest difference between reading versus studying a book, okay? So with that said, let's take a look at this week's focus. It really is about archetypes. An archetype is a character who represents a specific set of universal or recognizable behaviors. And a lot of this language will be familiar to you. So today I am asking that you annotate on 3 different archetypes. So from this one slide, you're going to choose one of these heroes to find in your text and make sense of in your text. So again, as you're reading and highlighting and labeling, you're either going to recognize a traditional hero who is your typical superhero, strong, quote unquote, attractive, has some form of special talent or power, and is inherently good. There's a specific purpose to him or her. And others rely on this hero to save the day. Very few dystopian novels have this type of hero. Most of our books will have the reluctant hero. This reluctant hero comes across as actually weak, looks ordinary like any one of us, but is really easy to relate to. They don't typically believe in themselves up front, but they're put to a test and they win. They start to realize who they are and what they're capable of, and they come out better in the end. There's also that anti-hero, typically looks bad and may actually dress more like the bad guy. But actually, this character has something to prove, goes against the norm, but is seen in the end as good by others. So again, one of these hero types should be identified and made sense of in your reading today. A second archetype I'm going to ask that you identify is either going to be a villain, a damsel in distress, or a sidekick. The villain typically looks mean, may dress in dark colors, and can be animal-esque, alien-esque, or even machine-like. They're inherently bad. They need that power, and they are definitely against the hero. The damsel in distress, on the other hand, may come across as weak, young, and attractive. Could be a person, could even be a place or an ideal. They represent what is good. And they are definitely the target of our villain. I even think of the movie or the television show or even the books based on the Smurfs. For this particular story, it's not so much a Smurf that is the damsel in distress, but the Smurf village. It is a place, and that place represents all that is good. And of course, Gargamel, the bad guy, wants to take it down. So again, it's not always an individual. It could be a place, could be an ideal. Last but not least, we have the sidekick on this slide. And this sidekick is usually lacking in qualifications, whether they be good or bad, but they provide comedy. They may look like the opposite of the hero or the villain. Their goal, though, is to help out the person to whom they are fighting with or fighting for. And keep in mind, a villain as well as a hero can have a sidekick. They're usually helpful or trying to be helpful, but they're typically not as good as the hero or as evil as the villain. So again, a second archetype should come from this slide. And your third set of options come from this third slide on archetypes. We have the mystic, and then we have the victim sacrifice. The mystic is usually an older and wiser character. They may even appear slightly otherworldly, but they're usually mysterious and have power, sometimes silent, sometimes not so silent. They guide the hero, and they may even sacrifice themselves for the hero. The victim or sacrifice is usually older, could be a parent, a family member, a mystic, could also be very young. But they act as a cause. They trigger a series of events in the story. And again, they're usually linked to the hero, sometimes the villain. But they don't die in vain. They don't die for absolutely no reason. They actually, again, trigger a series of events, oftentimes getting the story going. So when you're all done with your annotations, you should, again, have 3 in total. Make sure your archetypes are clearly labeled. Make sure you have passages that have been highlighted to reference in your notes. Make sure you've connected the dots between the passage and your 3 archetypes. And of course, our 10, 10, and 10 rule. Make sure your notes make sense to you in 10 minutes, 10 days, and even 10 years. Last week at our Google Meet, we talked about coming up with a system over the weekend, if we didn't already have one, a system that makes sense of our notes to us. So just kind of bringing that back for us today, I thought I would share with you some visuals of what we discussed. So again, please know these are not the only options, but I did want to remind you that we have 4 areas of annotation focus. So you might want to have a different color for each. You may want to have these clearly labeled on the cover of your book. And then as you could see, have your different Post-its sticking out. Somebody had mentioned that they have all the same colored Post-its, but they've labeled them at the top as they're sticking out of the book. That also works. But then to see an example of today, I found a passage in the book that I have been reading. It's called Verify. It is a dystopian book by Joelle Charbonneau. So for those of you who are reading the testing, this may be a book that you would like to read at the end of the series. But this passage really reflects the victim in the book. Mary, our main character, her mother has died in a car accident. And it's this passage that really brings to light something about her mother's death. Breadcrumbs. Mom's paintings were like the bits of bread. Her trail led from Liberty Tower down LaSalle Street to whatever the last painting represented. That was where something went wrong. The trail wasn't complete, but logic dictated that it had to pick up somewhere on LaSalle Street, the street where that man with the yellow umbrella found me. By the way, this book is taking place in futuristic Chicago, Illinois. And ultimately, our main character, Mary, is starting to realize that her mother's death has really triggered a series of events. Her death is symbolic because it acts like a key. It's starting to unlock the mystery. So here is one of my archetypes. I would then need to go back and find 2 more. I look forward to seeing your 3 archetypes in total. Happy annotating, happy reading.